Yeah, Paul asked me to fill in for the introduction today. So thank you for bearing with us through the technical issues. Before I do the introduction, I want to make the announcement. Many of you probably know that the abstract submission deadline for the EEID conference has been extended. So it's now February 10th, this coming Tuesday. And so for those who are still thinking about going to Virginia Tech for EEID, you've got a few more days to get it together for an abstract. All right, introductions. It is my pleasure to introduce Sarah Olson from the Wildlife Conservation Society. Sarah joined WCS in 2011, and she's currently the Director of Health Research for the Health Program. She received a joint PhD in Population Health and Environment and Resources from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and she studied how deforestation and climate affect malaria incidents in the Amazon. So now she's based in Bozeman, Montana, where she provides research and leadership and research support to field veterinarians and conservation staff around the world. She's trained in environmental research and public health, and her research with WCS is focused on frontline conservation and wildlife health challenges, including the wildlife trade and emerging infectious diseases, Ebola virus disease ecology in great apes and bats, avian influenza in wild birds, and white nose syndrome in North American bats. And she's currently focused on understanding and mitigating wildlife health and zoonotic disease threats, often associated with anthropogenic drivers, and helping to grow sustainable and effective wildlife health surveillance systems. So the title of her talk will be One Health in Action, Wildlife Conservation and Disease Prevention in a Changing World. Now let me try to get the slides up for you.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. And it looks like I might have a Zoom account open here in the background when you need to run. I think well, we'll see if the internet holds. I might be able to jump onto Zoom when we're done, but let's use this for now.
Great.
Great. Are the slides up?
Slides are up. Go for it.
I appreciate and big thanks for getting me on this forum. Really excited to have this opportunity. This is an image from the Peruvian National Service of Agricultural Health inspecting a mass mortality of Peruvian pelicans in a breeding colony. This was at the beginning of the High Path AI 2344B outbreak in Peru. Of course, HPAI is a poster child for why we need to put One Health into action. And there's also, I think all of us in the sector have seen a lot of talk about One Health in meetings and conferences. So here I hope to show you how a conservation organization is practically trying to do the work on the ground with growing wildlife health surveillance, monitoring, as well as policy and research. So I hope when you leave and somebody asks you how One Health is being implemented, you can share some examples from our little corner of the world here. Next slide. It should be WCS impact around the world.
Yep, got it.
So a little background on WCS, we're boots on the ground, eyes on the horizon, global conservation organization. We work in over 50 countries, and some we've been working over 34 years. We work locally with nearly 500 local partners. We're science-based. We convert a lot of our local work into big goals on ecological integrity, including protecting 30% of the planet by 2030 and leveraging conservation to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, for example. We also work on priority species, shown there, and as well as policies to end wildlife trade and health risks to wildlife, people, and livestock. Next slide. Globally, we have a dozen regions and 7 thematic areas listed there in the upper right. The places we work are on these front lines and places where ecological stressors are pushing against intact natural areas, whether with logging or mining. And we're working in these places to conserve that ecological integrity. And we're working also on wildlife trafficking, where wildlife trade is creating harms. And from a spillover perspective, creating these unnatural contacts and mixing with populations of wildlife that are under extreme levels of stress. Next slide. So this is a quick overview of our health program. We're the only global conservation NGO with a robust health program. It goes back some 100 years of work on wildlife health, as we're a zoo originally based organization, getting back to Teddy Roosevelt and the New York Zoological Society. We've been doing work in the One Health space, involved with the 2004 Manhattan Principles from the earliest days. Very multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral. We work with field-based conservationists on any given day. I'll be working with social scientists. I'll be working with biologists. I'll be working with a lot of veterinarians, of course, on our health team, and folks in the molecular lab space as well. So we work on both communicable and non-communicable health threats. A big focus of our health team is partnering with the counter wildlife trafficking team, as well as our rights and community team. Make sure we're doing ethical engagement with Indigenous people and local communities. And then last year, we also were recognized alongside the USGS and the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative as a collaborating center, member of their consortium for research, diagnosis, and surveillance of wildlife. Next slide. All right, so spillover interfaces should be new territory for this group, but we work in places, and next slide after that, it should be Reina's Swiss cheese thing.
Yep.
With ecological stressors like land cover change and wildlife trade are creating these new interfaces and spillover opportunities. So interfaces, of course, are where wildlife and livestock and people are intermixing and sharing their pathogens. Spillover impacts people in the form of zoonotic disease, but it also impacts livestock and wildlife. For example, we've got ASF threatening the highly endangered Barbarossa pig. It's no longer showing up in some of our camera traps in Indonesia. We've also, IWCS worked on PPRV, the rinderpest of sheep and goats. Of course, both of these diseases affect both wildlife and livelihoods, especially the most economically disadvantaged groups of people. Next slide, please. So One Health is in some ways about removing stressors on the landscape and promoting landscape immunity, really helping bring systems back into equitable balance, protecting the health of all. And our health program is working hard in these spaces. Today's talk is a bit of a survey of 3 different ways we're putting One Health into action. Next slide. So today's seminar, I'm opted to focus in on spillover, of course, for this crowd, but we do work on non-communicable health threats. I'm going to do our surveillance work, and then also show where we've engaged on policy and advocacy efforts, and then finish up with some recent research on both wildlife trade and land stressors as they relate to pathogen emergence. I just want to give a shout out that we're really open to collaboration with researchers. So if anything here sparks some ideas, please get in touch and let's connect. Next slide. So wildlife health surveillance, that's a SIGA. Next slide, please. All right, so why wildlife health surveillance is important. First, it's important to help us better understand pandemic risks and drivers of pathogen emergence. We also know it helps us understand questions of food security and safety in relation to wild meat consumption. Of course, it also helps us support monitoring and management of the wildlife-livestock interface. And in turn, this helps with the sustainability of agricultural-based economies, but also green economies. And finally, wildlife health surveillance is critical to understanding threats and human impacts on wildlife species conservation and broadly on the integrity of ecosystems. And these last 2 points I think are especially important because species conservation and ecosystem integrity has, of course, intrinsic value, but they're also tightly interconnected with human health through our social ecological systems. Next slide. So why is there an urgent need? Well, there's very little to no disease monitoring in the vast majority of species. There's really no requirement for wildlife disease reporting except for well listed, and these are mostly livestock diseases. There is a voluntary reporting mechanism there as well. If you look at the National Biodiversity and Strategy Action Plans of countries, there's only 6% mention wildlife health or zoonotic disease related activities. And by and large, we see when there is a mortality event, the response are reactive. There's very little in the preventative space. We know data management is a challenge and a priority here. Next slide. So this is a thumbnail sketch of what is wildlife health surveillance. You can kind of step in anywhere in this process, but a lot of times wildlife health in low and middle income countries will start with detection of some weird or unusual mortality event, making sure that information gets captured, analyzed, and the findings make its way to a decision body where the different One Health sectors can collaborate and share ideas and think through what's the most kind of strategic response, and ideally, generating a One Health success. Surveillance is really an adaptive management cycle, and a lot of time and effort should be kind of invested in thinking about what are the questions you want to answer and what surveillance, whether passive or active, can be used to help you kind of guide your decision-making processes. So this cycle continues again and again, and it needs to be adapted to the context and, of course, the resources that are available in the country or whatever site that you're planning to implement it. Next slide. So there's a lot of barriers to implementation in wildlife health. It would be surprising that there's quite a few trade disincentives when you find an agricultural pathogen in wildlife. We know these go unreported all the time in the places that we work. There's also a lack of One Health actor collaboration in terms of data generation and interpretation. We know the environmental sector it has not really been integrated well into a lot of the One Health work. Usually, focuses on livestock and human health. It's in places with wildlife conservation, there's seems to be like a perpetual lack of resources. There's standards for how do we implement at national, if not local level surveillance. There is some global standards out there. And that also speaks to this last barrier, which is, there's some global standards and guidelines out there, but there's really a lack of processes to meet those standards. So next slide, please. This should be a slide with global on the left and local on the right.
Yep.
So this is the challenge. Like, we want to use existing resources to build out national wildlife health surveillance systems and approaches. And to do that, you need to kind of tap into both the environmental, the animal health, and the human health sectors, because they already are in the places that you want to be working often. And you also need to do this across scale. So you need to start at that local level and make sure that information reaches the national level. Next. And that's kind of where we're working at WCS, is trying to connect these global guidance. So this is the World Organization for Animal Health emblem on the left, and WCS's kind of initiative and approach to building up wildlife health surveillance or monitoring. We call this Wild Health Net for short because it's so long. But that's our area of work. So making sure we're connecting and scaling those local practices all the way up to national scales and meeting those global guidelines. Next slide. So here's just a quick map of where we've been doing wildlife health net around the world with a couple initiatives of different projects, all very resource dependent. Just go walk through kind of and break this down and how we do it in these different places. So build, this component of Wild Health Net is about getting into place and figuring out who are the actors and kind of connecting and identifying those actors and creating these operational networks. So it's really about bringing people together, starting to build relationships and trust among the network actors, and mapping out different lines of communication. And these communications and responsibilities are very, country dependent. What we see in Laos is different from what we see in Peru, is different from what we see in Cambodia or Madagascar. So kind of working and customizing how this network acts to each of the countries that we're working. I think another thing is it's intimidating sometimes, but we really encourage it, to start where you can with the resources that you have, and to do this, continual process of trying something out when it comes to building a network and communication structure, and then having, assessing what works, what doesn't work, and having that guide kind of either policy development Next. So a couple of examples. So this should be a slide. Somebody walking around with the alligators, it looks like. They're in the Congo and a taxi cab. And big shout out to Anna Priest, who's our One Health program manager there in Congo. I'll try to give out shout outs if I forget, they're on the slide. But the work that we do is really kind of localized and dependent on these amazing staff that we have working with the country programs. So here's just an example. We had some funding for a sustainable wildlife management workshop to bring together and to just start building these relationships in country, getting representatives from the different sectors and from civil society to come together to think about strategies for working together to prevent zoonoses. So this is kind of an initial stage step towards building a surveillance or monitoring system. Next, please. Here's another example. So this is going back to some of the work in Cambodia back in 2021 and 20. And it shows how, working through this process of building a network and identifying network partners, we were able to, identify over 100 wildlife health events, including 90-some carcasses that were collected across Cambodia. And before this, it was, again, we talked to villagers and they're like, yeah, we're seeing wildlife mortality events, but we report them and nobody comes. So I know there was very little reporting before, but once we got this step, we were able to do quite a bit of work. And a couple more slides on the Cambodia network. And we're also able, to detect, pathogens like African swine fever, H5N1, as well as Nipah virus. Let's jump over to Peru. So here's Dr. Paulo Colchaus, wildlife health specialist in our WCS Peru program. We had some resources to pilot doing wildlife health monitoring in some protected areas, and we just wanted to do like 2 or 3 protected areas. WSS Peru works really closely with their National Parks Agency in Peru, providing technical support on other topics. And we introduced this idea, and they're like, "This is great. We actually want to do it in all 72 protected areas." So we scaled that kind of idea to do, just 2 up to 72. And it was actually a really great success. And by the end of August 2025, the Park Service had detected almost 2,000 wildlife health events involving 143 species. And this work is contributing to constructing an action plan for national wildlife health surveillance across the country. So we're continuing to work with our partners there. Next slide. This is work in our backyard in Alaska. So we had some USDA funding to investigate SARS-CoV-2. But we designed into this effort to pilot participatory community surveillance of both wild and domestic animals, so hunter-harvest animals in Alaska, as well as wastewater in the communities. So we worked across Alaska for some of the scope of the work. That work package that focused on communities was done in Yavik, which is formerly known as Barrow, as well as Bethel and Ketchikan, which, if you know Alaska, are very different social and ecological settings. And while we did a lot of testing and diagnostics of samples, there was also this package of social science methodologies to create scientifically robust and culturally acceptable surveillance and investigation practices. Just want to encourage you to stay tuned. We have a short documentary coming out that was created by UAC Science, which is an indigenous corporation up in Yavik, and that should be out later this year. Oh, and shout out to Michelle Johnson on that work as well, who's running our One Health work up in the Arctic Bridge program. All right, next slide. This is, it should say skills.
Yep.
So here, what we do is help, once you have that network map, to kind of do an assessment of what are the existing skills, what are the existing capacities, are there knowledge gaps, and to make sure we're providing targeted delivery and context-specific training for every actor in the surveillance network. And there's a lot of human resources involved here, so making sure that we evaluate the training effectiveness and continually improve the processes. Also use the train the trainers approach to support sustainability and leave behind teaching resources. Next slide. So here's just an example of some of those resources and how they're contextualized. So this is, a list of those core competencies. I think this is Malaysian language. And we have some PowerPoint presentations, instructional videos, and quick pocket guides for the folks that are doing particularly important roles in the network, like sampling wildlife. Next slide. So here's an example of that touching down. So this is the Republic of Congo, and making sure that we have a kind of select set of folks that are distributed across northern Congo so that they can respond to reports of wildlife mortalities. These reports of wildlife mortalities come from communities or from people patrolling or working in the forest. And then we respond and safely collect samples so that we can do rapid testing for Ebola and anthrax. If you want the full protocol, this paper on the left, you can find it in the info there. And here, a big shout out to Dr. Alan Onzi, who's been working there many, many years and helps lead this training and work with the communities who report the mortality events to us. Next slide, please. Next slide should say tech. We've got a history of coming across, I think, really well-intentioned technology products for wildlife health surveillance. And testing them ourselves in places. So we use the Canadian database, and you try to use it in lower middle income countries. Some things work, some things don't work. But building on that, working to really identify what are the needs of wildlife health surveillance in these places, and carefully thinking about deploying appropriate and solutions that are sustainable. So we want to make sure we're facilitating data collection and data sharing so that it rolls up and can inform not only intelligence for wildlife health, but intelligence for One Health, and so informing the public and livestock decision makers as well. So we're also thinking a lot about standardized data management and analysis in ways that we don't have 2 countries side by side building up different data models for wildlife health surveillance. Next slide. And so in this space, one of the first areas we've entered into is thinking about how do we integrate rangers into wildlife health surveillance. And for those of you who don't do work in conservation, there's these two tools, Earth Ranger and SMART, that help rangers and protected area managers collect data across protected areas. The SMART tool has been around since 2011. It's essentially a smartphone that rangers can take into the field, and they fill out questionnaires when they hear a gunshot or they encounter a snare. So as patrols are moving through the forest, they're able to capture this information. Big news in the conservation sector is Earth Ranger and SMART. They're going to be merging, and that's going to be happening over the next 2 years. But a tool like SMART is found in over 100 countries. It's being deployed in the protected areas. It's available in languages. And so we're using this platform to explore, what's being collected. So there's that paper there in the middle bottom of the slide where we've, investigated health perceptions and monitoring practices using SMART currently. And people are actually collecting this information, but the challenge is it's not actually moving out. It's still very siloed. Like the information they're collecting is not standardized, and it doesn't move out of the conservation sector. And I've also been working to think about how to actually implement a health questionnaire in these tools, so that when the rangers are in the field, they have enough information to capture the basics. And the next slide will show you what that looks like. So this is the questionnaire on a smartphone. It captures really basic information about what's happening at this wildlife health event, what species are being observed, are there any domestic animals present. And if the rangers have been trained, they document, what animals they sampled and what samples they collected here. So we do have this article coming out in Conservation Biology that explains a bit more about how you can implement it and some of the highs and the lows of that implementation process. So check that out. Next slide, please. Another kind of level that we're working at is this Health and Wildlife Knowledge Data Service, for short. This is coming soon. Who's it for? Well, it's for public agencies, private organizations, academics, anybody who's interested in conducting wildlife health surveillance or monitoring. The idea is the data remains private in this private account until you're ready to share it onwards. And it's not intended as a data repository, like, oh, I'm going to go collect all my data, and then after the end, I'm going to publish my data, and then I'm going to upload it. No, it's designed to be used, as soon as you get your funding resource to start a new project, you log in and you upload your surveillance goals or your targets or your research objectives as a kind of global public good. I really want to encourage best practices for data, for wildlife health data surveillance and management. The idea then is to, if this is a good idea, it's a proposal, but with the community, if we have buy-in to kind of help share and distribute the maintenance costs across many parties, instead of all of us doing a research project or a surveillance effort and building up a data management system for that, if we all kind of pull together and develop a product that meets 90% of our needs. Ideas have multiple languages, of course, and the API to make sure that the data isn't siloed, that it can be moved to other platforms and to generate and support decision makers. Designed to be modular, so while it can do everything, what you're particularly interested in, that you can get in there and quickly and efficiently upload the information that you're collecting. WCS has experience building platforms like this. So there's a mermaid tool out there for coral reef monitoring that's been really successful. We're also involved with that SMART platform from the earliest days. So hoping that as an institution that brings sustainability and hopefully good data safety practices that we've already got experience with. And then also WCS is what we're leading. We're working closely with this community of practice called the Wildlife Health Intelligence Network, which I'll talk more about in a moment so that we can put this into practice. The paper there shown on the left is just an intense effort where we're just thinking, how do you structure and standardize national to subnational wildlife health data that could be collected. So that paper is out. Next slide, please. And if you want to learn more, I encourage you, we have this 15-minute YouTube video that Diego put together. Yeah, big shout out, sorry. Diego Montesinos on the previous slide. But we're going to go in kind of testing and development. So we have that data model and we're just implementing it in a kind of a version 0 right now. But please get in touch if you want to support this effort and see what it looks like on a web browser. All right, next slide. All right, now we're into the response phase. So once you have studies building up a national wildlife health surveillance monitoring or surveillance system, we want to make sure that we're bringing intelligence to help formulate the appropriate response when something is found or when something needs a response. So making sure we're facilitating the integration of the wildlife health network, tapping both the local expertise, but also the expertise of the global One Health community, in response actions and any preventative policies or interventions. And this is where WIN comes in as well, making sure there's kind of a community of practice that, you know, brings those best practices around any response, in particular response. Next slide. So here's a case study. So lumpy skin disease was caught on a camera trap in Thailand. And we were working in Cambodia, so we alerted rangers in the wildlife sanctuaries to be on the lookout. And sure enough, they started tracking this banteng, which is an endangered cow, kind of ancestral cow species. And it did succumb, and so we were able to confirm it. That part of the reason it succumbed was because of lumpy skin disease. So we took this back to the working group in Cambodia, and the working group was able to coordinate a vaccination effort of domestic cattle. So these wildlife sanctuaries are really just islands surrounded by communities of small kind of cattle farmers, and getting out to those communities and doing targeted kind of essentially a ring vaccination. Unfortunately, since this effort was made, there has not been any additional cases of lumpy skin disease in these endangered banteng. Next slide. Another space where we are for specific response is a big effort to publish what is working and what has not worked. Last year alone, WCS published over 35 peer-reviewed scientific papers covering all dimensions of wildlife health. I just pulled down a few here over the years that are more relevant for the surveillance work. Next slide. All right, let's see if we're powering through here. So moving on to some of the policy and advocacy work. I think, you know, we bring that foundation of scientific rigor, so it brings us some authority as we go into the policy and advocacy spaces to bring about change. WCS uses everything from social nudges all the way up at the local level, all the way up to global policy engagement in this space. And we'll bring all the tools to bear and all the science to bear as well. Next slide. So I mentioned WIN, so this is the Wildlife Health Intelligence Network. And this effort came from a working group there in the lower right, where we worked through a theory of change to like, how do we build stronger wildlife health surveillance systems globally? Thinking, you know, it has to happen from the bottom up. And one of the kind of conclusions of that theory of change is we do need community of practice. And so that working group is transitioning into this, this network to help amplify local knowledge, solutions, and processes to strengthen the implementation of wildlife health surveillance. So really helping kind of elevate locally led and context-specific approaches, making sure everything's aligned with those global standards, thinking through, you know, the sustainable IT infrastructure that can support these efforts as well. And then finally, thinking through how do we do surveillance with communities that is ethical and kind of reflects the best practices when it comes to co-development. So check out the website there. We have this one paper as well out on alignment of wildlife health surveillance with the UN's SDGs. And this on the lower right is just stuck in review at Lancet Planetary Health, but one day. Next slide, please. In the policy space, celebrating a bit of a 4-year anniversary here. So the funding for the project that launched and helped develop this SOP was 4 years past. So we're 4 years past that funding. The working group continues, and the SOP is being implemented. They are helping, the SOP is guiding joint investigations of high-path avian influenza in sick and dead free-ranging wild birds. We see a lot of mass mortality events happening in Asian open-bill storks. We've been invited to help investigate human cases of high-path AI that have been ultimately linked to poultry. There was also this unfortunate recent case of a rabies incident in a rural community that involved golden jackals, and a working group coordinated response to help with sample transport there. A big shout out here to Ahsoka Chia, as this has been an amazing staff person on the ground in Cambodia, who's been working with government partners for over 15 years to help support. We continue to support the working group and bring that technical expertise to the working group. And of course, WCS tries to bring resources and funding when it's available as well. Next slide, please. All right, and then, just within the work that we do as well. So trying here to strive for best practices for grade 8 tourism. We know pathogens are known to move in both directions from grade 8 to people and people to grade 8. So this is a part. WCS helps governments, basically staff and operate national parks around the world. Bali and Doki is one of these sites. And this site set some One Health policy objectives, including, maintaining a wildlife disease carcass reporting network, making sure that they're conducting pathogen surveillance as a part of their large mammal inventory efforts. They're also doing a health clinic on site. So the main base for this park, they're providing health to 150 employees, including eco guards, researchers, and trackers. This means that they're getting regular vaccinations, regular testing, and they also have to go in and make sure they get a health pass before they go into the forest to work on a rotation. And then they're also working outside the park. So there's about 3,000 people that live in some small villages and communities around the park, and making sure that they're carrying out community awareness, raising activities on health, hygiene, and sanitation, and creating a human disease surveillance network. And last year, early in the year, this was one of the sites where we were able to help the public health agency detect an mpox case. So again, reaching from the global all the way down to even site level work and policy. Next slide. Another area of work, and this is like working with the IUC and World Commission on Protected Areas. So I had the pleasure of co-chairing this task force with Skylar Hopkins. Quick tip, if you ever get the chance to work with Skylar, just say yes. This task force developed this peer-to-peer guide that helps protected and conserved area managers leverage their deep expertise and practical experience to help them apply One Health in practice. So it's, again, scaling a lot of that global guidance to the protected area manager. And so we have some adaptable frameworks to help them assess infectious disease risks, which is called MAP, to reduce infectious disease risks, that ACT tool, and then to build long-term One Health capacity, which is CREATE. We'll go to the next slide here. So zooming out to other important global multilaterals, WCS was engaged from the earliest days in the pandemic agreement process. And if you recall way back in the first iteration, it did not include prevention in the title. But we worked within our policy team to really make sure we had engagement, and they hustled a lot. We generated like 14 versions of input on text for the negotiators, negotiations. We brought key interventions to the floor during meetings, and we wrote timely op-eds to help inform the negotiating body. And it was successful. So the version that's now going before the UN General Assembly, I think it's in September for a vote, now include both wildlife health surveillance under the umbrella of multi-sectoral surveillance, which is the WHO term for basically One Health surveillance, as well as One Health. There's both those articles cover those topics. And other areas of work include the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health. So this falls within the Convention on Biological Diversity, and there we're presently providing advice and feedback on developing indicators to evaluate progress on this plan. A big shout out here to Christine, who is formerly WCS, but was really imperative to making any progress in these spaces because there's just only so many hours in the day. All right, running around to the last kind of component here, some spillover research, areas of active research. I'm going to focus in on an area of wildlife trade and another on landscape stress areas. And very much still work in progress, but folks, bats are consumed in Africa and across the African continent and in the Republic of Congo. My first visit to Congo, I actually in Brazzaville, I didn't realize what I was seeing, but in hindsight, it was, like, oh, this is where it happens. They actually, these island hellbum bats, they capture them and they're brought live into Brazzaville, which is they're captured in islands just off the Congo River and then brought live into the city. So I think it was my first or second trip to Brazzaville. I was seeing live bats being sold on the side of the road. They, next slide, please. So, I guess I started WCS in 2011. We were aware of this interface, but it took a while for us to get around to doing a functional analysis of what this trade, what was actually happening in this bat trade in Congo. And once we did it, it revealed that there was established kind of system. We have hunters moving the product to restaurant keepers, middlemen, intermediaries, as well as market and street sellers in Brazzaville, like that guy I saw on the street on my first visit. And then from there, moving the product on to consumers. One of the findings is that it is an important source of income for the sellers, but it's usually not a chosen or particularly desired profession. We also learned that there was actually pretty good awareness of zoonotic diseases among the hunters, but they themselves perceived that because they never got sick, it wasn't a concern to them, whereas the vendors and consumers actually had little knowledge to begin with. So our survey of this value chain suggested we needed to do follow-up research to better understand the zoonotic pathogen risk associated with this particular trade. And a big shout out here to Everard Misomu, who was a scientific lab manager but stepped up to help us do some of the social science and value chain analysis. We just roped him into that. Next slide, please. Everard also helped with the lab work, of course. So here's some initial findings where we screened coronavirus and exovirus RNA in these idleland bats. And what we found is, yes, there is lots of coronavirus, especially beta coronavirus lineage D. Over 61% of them were positive. We did a min-ion sequence run on 23 of them, and they nest really close to this coronavirus that was found in Cameroon. So continuing, so stay tuned, they've got the full phylogenetic workup of that. And we also got paramyxovirus hits. So another reason I want to share off this slide and the picture of the folks here is to highlight that all this work is being done in Brazzaville. When I first joined WCS many years ago, we were exporting all of our samples, and it was a big logistical lift to do that. But really with Francine and Toomey's research group, so this is her center here, the Christophe Marot, we're able to do much of this, practically all of it in country now. And that's just a huge, behind the scenes, there's capacity development that went into the findings that you're seeing here, and just getting the sequencing done in country. Next slide, please. So here's the serological findings. So what we did was we had sero samples from the bats themselves. We also had sero samples from 100 people associated with the bat trade. And then we had 100 controls who had no reported bat contact. And the table on the right, we did test for everything, but if there's nothing in that, that means it was a negative. Just did it so it was a bit cleaner and easier to read. So we did this assay for exposure to 17 different viruses. Many thanks to Dr. Eric Lang and his lab for getting this up and running in country. Like I said, a huge effort there. And we did a multiplex microsphere immunoassay for IgG. And we had these glycoprotein targets for filovirus and henipavirus. So filovirus is on top and paramyxos on bottom. Takeaway results, there was, again, no seropositivity detected in the community control samples. There were concerning levels of trader exposure to at least 4 high-risk pathogens, including Marburg, so Ebola virus, Bundibugyo, and Typhorus. And that Marburg was really interesting. There's no documented Marburg outbreaks or cases in the Republic of Congo. If you look, the islands are also not showing like they've been exposed to Marburg virus. We think may be happening. Aegypticus does. We do find it in the Republic of Congo. There are some caves in southern Congo. That the bat traders may be coming across Rosetta's Aegypticus, and we need to go back and follow that. These initial results have been shared with government partners, and our team on the ground is taking the next steps there to kind of navigate where we go from here. And this is being written up in a preprint and should be out, I think, March. We're shooting for March for that preprint to come out. So here's a big shout out to Eva Kusuma, who's been leading this work. She was former staff at WCS, and then she's gone to RBC to get her DVM and is now working on her PhD there. And a big team effort to make sure this work is progressing bit by bit. Next slide. All right, and then rounding it out, I'm going to check in on the work we're doing on landscape stressors. So we're going to, next slide, it should be a world map for the Republic of Congo and Cambodia. So WCS Cambodia has about 250 staff working tirelessly to protect what is left of Cambodia's forest, but we also dedicate a lot of efforts to understand what are the more indirect consequences of deforestation. So work there has looked at impacts of conservation, climate change, livelihood. But the component we brought was to look at this health and infectious diseases. So this is work Matthew Prevost started on as a postdoc with WCS, and he's now at University of Calgary and continuing to work on this system. So we're gonna go from Republic of Congo to Cambodia now. Next slide. Next slide, please. And what we see here in the next couple slides, you just can click through this until you hit 2014. But you can watch what's happening with primary forest. And as of now, there's just 3% primary forest left. And over the years, there was basically a loss of 200,000 hectares per year in Cambodia. And then after that, you can just click through these slides. So it comes down to two questions. What happens during this transition period from forest to non-forest? Is there a particular risk related to the transition, particularly for disease emergence? So you should click through, you can just click through the deforestation chronotrend slide until you get to, there should be a total of 9 sites on dry season on the right.
Yep.
And what Matthew Prevost developed when he did his postdoc there was this deforestation chronotrend approach. So each site you get a snapshot of forest, disturbed, and then cleared land. Then you replicate that across sites and then across seasons. So in Cambodia, he was able to do 9 sites and to cover two like both rainy and dry seasons in all those sites. So again, it's substituting time for space. Next slide. So he published some of his findings in this article, links at the bottom, small mammals at the edge of deforestation in Cambodia. And it was just a tantalizing work. Like we weren't able to do everything we want, but we did find that these disturbed zones transiently increased species diversity and contact opportunities. We found that these stable, low-density forest species gave way to fluctuating peri-domestic species, and that the host community changes are really rapid, and they hinted that they may facilitate pathogen emergence during these processes. So we had these, we weren't able to nail anything down, but that opened up questions about generalist species acting as a bridge and disturbed areas acting as a bridge as well. And we identified these gaps and we were able to nail things about patterns about diversity. We were thinking about if, to go back and do kind of hybrid or viral enrichment metagenomics on the sample, as well as to think more about how do we integrate host health indicators in these types of study designs. Next slide. So we're fortunate to get Charles Roux as an doctoral research fellow for 3 years, and he was able to go back and revisit this sample set. And what he's done here is with that twist protocol, using these viral enrichment genomic approaches. Oh my God, I'm talking to you. Viral enrichment metagenomics. And you can see the study design structured here on the left. So on the top left, we have 2 forest genera, the Maxomes and the Ratus, and then we have in the middle the disturbed species, Maxomes and Ratus, and then on the right, the cleared sites. Then we have this the wet and dry seasons represented there, and then on the left, you see the viral families that we picked up using the metagenomic approach for viral enrichment. The darker the color, the more reads we have for that viral family. And this is just to touch off the best. It's going to be doing deeper dives in the coming months, but showing that as we go from forest to more, from forest to disturbed, we see a big kind of shift in what's happening there in the viral populations. And then on the far right, once we get to cleared, we see it looks like increasing viral diversity and also shifts in viral diversity. So stay tuned again here as he works through and does more of the work of the samples here. Next slide. A big shout out to Institute Pasteur, who's helping us with that work there. So the kind of frontier of what we're doing now is transferring and improving that approach to these study sites. So here we're taking the approach to Colombia and Bolivia. And here a big shout out to Mary Cruz, who again is leading this multi-pronged effort. In Colombia, what we're seeing is small scale farming leading to a lot of the deforestation and transition. Whereas in Bolivia, we're looking at large scale sugar agriculture coming in and doing a lot of the sugarcane production coming in. Next slide. So the study has kind of a deep dive into nature-human relationships. So there's a social science component where we're collecting local epidemiological context, doing some community things to understand interfaces alongside ethnographic interviews, capturing the host dynamics. We brought in bats in addition to the rodent sampling that we did in Cambodia. And then we're tracking not only the pathogen kind of populations and diversity, but also the rodent and bat health indicators. So working with Gabor Sergic to understand and track those. Again, investigating along these gradients of change at 4 different forested landscapes, and then using this information to identify pathogens and social determinants of risk, assess risks and points of intervention, and then use this as a launch point for prioritizing targets for research at these sites in Colombia and Bolivia. So far, the team just finished the study captures last year, and we've got some good numbers. And what they're going to be doing is right now we're designing the pooling for the twist protocol for that viral enrichment metagenomics approach. And we have a good number of samples, and we're really excited to see what comes out of that analysis. Next slide. And just a big shout out to our country programs and local partners, including the Humboldt Institute lab in Colombia, we're working with Dr. Volga's lab at the Institute for Biology and Biotechnology in Bolivia, as well as the Leibniz Institute folks, Dr. Alex Greenwood. So that's about, and hopefully, Jamie, I'm going to be able to log on to Zoom here as soon as I get up. I hope that giving everyone a glimpse of how we're trying to use conservation to address spillover risk. Some days, especially recently here in the US, it really doesn't feel like we're making progress. But I hope I convinced you that we are starting to put one health and moving the needle a bit. Many thanks for your attention and time.
Yay. Thank you, Sarah. That was a great talk, valiantly given in the face of technical challenges. I see you now re-entering the Zoom call. Let's see if that works. Hopefully so.
Fingers crossed.
All good. We can see you, Sarah.
Can you hear me on the? Oh, look, I am coming in. All right, I'm going to hang up the phone call. Thank you, Jamie.
Yes.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to jump. Sarah, that was an amazing talk. If we need slide support for any of the Q&A, Will, do you have access to it yet?
I do not have access to the slides. No, so I think
Maybe if Sarah's actually back on internet, maybe that'll work.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems to be working. My headset does not seem to be working on my computer, but I think we can fight through that.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm sorry to miss the Q&A. That was a great talk, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jamie. Bye.
Bye.
All right, your co-host now, Sarah, if you need to share. But yeah,
Thanks.
please, if anyone has any questions, ask away to Dr. Olson.
Yeah, people probably have to run for lunch. I also appreciate folks sticking on for a couple extra minutes there. Thanks, Will. Hi, Dan. Thanks. Yeah, no worries.
I had a question about the Earth Ranger integration, actually.
Sure.
So like I know people are using that a lot for like wildlife human conflict and that kind of thing, but how much kind of traction is there for Earth Ranger and that kind of side for the disease monitoring, or is that continuing to be kind of like an area of development?
So yeah, I mean, Earth Ranger is more in the sensor space. Like, so
Yeah.
Smart was building out like the tools for rangers to carry, and then Earth Rangers was building out this like package of like sensors.
Right.
Earth
Yeah.
Ranger and Wildlife Insights and actually Conservation X Labs, they've been trying to think about how do we move some of the AI tools to like they're called edge devices. So where you're bringing the AI kind of processes to the camera trap or the video trap. And thinking through like how do we innovate in that space. And there's like Earth Ranger was also doing like vulture monitoring. So just like watching where animals are moving, and the vultures are going to land. And what we're finding is like they could track the vultures and go there and go, this is unusual. We're getting a mortality event after the vulture was feeding there, and they're using them to track poisoning events.
I see.
So Earth Ranger and some of these sensor tools, I think, are going to be really valuable, and we're keeping an eye on this space to make sure that those types of that type of information can be integrated into that Hawk platform, for example, but making sure you're kind of keeping a 360 view on where information on wildlife health might come from.
Gotcha.
Ellie had a question in the chat. How do you coordinate such a dispersed team of web and project? Yeah, great question. It seems this is how we roll at WCS. So we have lots of webinars and coordinating meetings, and really try, I think, for us to like have one point person. So, my job is like 2% everywhere, but make sure there's one person who's kind of tasked with knowing a lot of the science and making sure they can help lean in and support the team. But happy to follow up off that offline. There's lots of different kind of models that we use to do that. And there's never one size fits all, it seems. Hey, Katie, great to see you. Thanks. It's been a long time. Um,
Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Olson? Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. That was a great talk, and sorry for all the technical issues at the beginning, but
no, I appreciate everybody sticking through with me. I was just like, oh, so close.
yeah. It was great to see you, and thanks for the talk again.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good to see some friendly folks and colleagues I haven't seen in a while.